Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dan Haidt, and this is Flies in the Kitchen. I'm really excited to bring you this episode because it's the farthest I've traveled to talk to someone. Well, the farthest I've FaceTimed, I guess. Anderson Cowan is the host of a number of podcasts in Los Angeles, California, namely the Film Vault, Cinematics, and the After Disaster. Mostly, though, he's a filmmaker with a good-sized library of short films, but he also has just completed his first full-length feature film, completely independently, with the help of investors through a website called Seed and Spark. It's an independent filmmaking crowdfunding platform. Film's called Groupers, and at the time of this recording, it's not available yet to the public. Not until next year sometime, which I know is kind of a drag, because we'll be talking about it a little bit here, but we all must be patient. I can tell you, however, that as of this recording, an unnamed distribution company, at least unnamed to me and everyone else, has actually shown some interest in picking up the film. Anderson has alluded to this on the Film Vault, but isn't able to divulge too much yet, so I guess you'll just have to stay tuned, like the rest of us. This was a lot of fun, albeit a little bit of a challenge. See, I really don't know Anderson at all, and this is my first time chatting with someone that I don't have at least some sort of history with. Plus, we chatted over FaceTime audio, so the whole face-to-face element was missing here. Still, I had a great time with it, and I think you'll like it. All right, so let's just get right to it. My conversation with Anderson Cowan. To be honest, I've listened to you guys, listened to Film Vault for the longest, I think, probably, 7 or 8 years, maybe.
It's a long time.
Yeah, and back when you were still over at Carolla's Network.
The belly of the beast.
Yeah. And actually, I first heard of you through an ad on his show. Because he was running ads and mostly about other shows on the network. That's how I heard about Larry Miller's show, and I listened to him for a while. But I started listening to you guys, and then you moved over to your own independent.
Yes.
And that was around the time that Larry moved over there too. It seemed like Corolla was just kind of cleaning house or something over there. I'm not sure.
No, we left on our own. There's still a misnomer, and I think a lot of people, especially his people, think that we got fired because of Carolla's hatred of me, and I could see how people would think that when a lot of people, it's just human nature that people think that they know what's going on, and you jump to conclusions. But no, our producer Logan actually he had some issues with another person that worked there, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about it.
Oh, that's all right.
He was let go. And we were told that we could get a new producer, but we'd have to pay out of pocket, and we still haven't been paid a dime. We were bringing in advertisement, we were bringing in money for the network, but we never signed the contract because we hated the contract.
Right.
And we're not good businessmen, so we were negotiating for a long time, never signed a contract. And when they fired our producer and told us that we could hire one out of pocket, I said, "This is perfect. We can finally just quit. We have an excuse." So we went dark for 6 weeks and then popped back up on our own, which is great.
Yeah, it's been great. Well, I want to talk about that in a minute, but I kind of want to start a little earlier than that. I think you've mentioned, didn't you grow up in L.A. or nearby or something like that?
Yeah. I was born and raised in Los Angeles.
Okay, so you were kind of already in
the eye of the storm as far as the industry goes, which is funny because I don't know if I'm a product of my environment, and that's why I ultimately decided I wanted to make movies for a living, or if if I lived in Iowa, I would. I like to think that if I lived in Iowa, I still would be, fascinated with movies and would have maybe moved out here or been making my own movies out in Iowa. I like to think that my dad took me to a lot of movies at a young age, and that's where the love came from. In fact, I loved movies so much that I never even allowed myself to think about working in the business because I thought it was too easy, and I got this Irish German guilt about me, and I always thought that like whatever I did for work had to be really hard. So for the first 20 years of my life, I thought I was going to be a scientist. All I wanted to do was marine biology because I thought that was a hard job, and I followed that path until I was around 19, 20 years old. I was working for Jacques Cousteau for the last couple years when I was following that dream, and I was going to go to Santa Cruz and become a marine biologist. But then that all fell apart, and I'm like, you know what? Life's too short. I should do something I really like. 25 years later, I finally make a movie. So
yeah.
So that's short 25 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that was around the time then when you decided, hey, I'm going to go to film school. I'm going to make this. I'm going to do it. And and you made Disgruntled. Yeah,
I made Disgruntled in film school. That was around 1999 was the first time I actually got to make a movie. Film school was really like a dream come true. I couldn't believe that I was actually working with actual film. It just seemed so, because I'm old enough to remember when making a movie was just so out of reach. You know, now technology, everyone has a studio in their pocket essentially.
Well, yeah, but, there's a scene where the Disgruntled is about a film student making a student film.
Oh, that's right. You saw the shorts.
I did watch it. Yeah,
that's great.
It is.
Thank you very much for watching that.
No, it's a fantastic film, and what I loved about it was how it looked like a real genuine depiction of a film student, even down to the physical editing of, clipping and cutting and splicing the film and the editing, which kind of made me laugh because I've heard you talk in the past about how everything that you do, you've got to be the one that edits everything all the time.
That was the case until Groupers, and then I finally let go of that a little bit. And I learned to edit, I think, through all the shorts that I did. I did 10 shorts before I made my feature. Right. And some of those shorts, man, I'm embarrassed of. I look at them and I'm just like, especially the editing. I was like kind of learning how to edit with my own films, and the editing's way better in Groupers. I can tell you that. I have a hard time even looking at the shorts because I just see all the mistakes.
Well, that's how we look at our own art. We see everything that's wrong about it, while everybody else sees, a real nice piece of art. So that's
hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think if you don't see your mistakes, I think the people that kind of just sit back and go, yeah, this is great, they never grow. They never actually, do anything better. George Lucas. So that's kind of what I'm okay with hating everything that I do. And strangely enough, I don't really hate Groupers, actually, yet. Maybe that's because I had so many other people working on it with me, so a lot of it is, I can thank other people for the stuff that I like about it. It's not all me.
Huh. So, was there kind of this moment in a film like this, oh wow moment in a film that convinced you that was what you wanted to do for the rest of your life?
I was working. Have you heard of Jacques Cousteau? Are you old
enough
to remember? A lot of people don't know who Jacques Cousteau is, which is kind of depressing. But I was lucky enough. I just went down to. He had an L.A. office. He had like 3 offices: one in France, one in L.A., and somewhere else. And I was. I whenever I wanted something, I would just go and knock on doors and ask if I could have it. And that's what I did with Cousteau Society. I just went and knocked on the door and I said, hey, can I intern for you guys? I know a lot about sharks. And they're like, no, we don't need an intern. And then, I don't know what it was, but 3 days later they called me and said, hey, you know what? We could use some help. So I was working there for about 2.5 years for free. My name is in all their little magazines, Calypso Log and stuff for my stint while I was there.
Nice.
And then they went belly up while I was there. It was funny. Every job I had, I went out of business, including the Cousteau Society. I had this really bad. I'd work at Round Table Pizza, and then that would go out of business. I would work every job that I had seemed to go out of business. But so I went out of business, and
your resume must have looked terrible.
It really did. It was all these extinct businesses.
Why did you leave?
And then because they went out of business. Right. It looks like it's just like a paper trail of embezzlement or something. Like every time you work somewhere, they go to.
All right.
But like that same week that they were going under, the guy that worked at the front desk, Elliot Cowan was his name. I should look him up, see what he's doing. He was an odd fella, but he had a friend who was making a movie, and he's like, "Hey, you want to be a PA on this movie that they're making?" And I'm like, "You know what? Let's do it." So that very week that Cousteau went out of business, I kind of decided, you know what? Let's try this movie thing. So I went and I worked on this movie called And God Spoke, which is a mockumentary about making a movie. So it's very confusing. It's kind of a cult hit within the movie making business now. A lot of like grips and people who work on sets love And God Spoke. You can look it up. Soupy Sales is in it. Andy Dick, Lou Ferrigno.
Huh.
It's a fun movie.
Huh.
And that was the very first movie I worked on, and I'm like, I dig it. I love it.
Wow.
And then I partied for 10 years, broke my back, did a lot of drugs, and then finally went to film school.
Okay, well, that's a good path. Well, a good end game, I guess.
I went out and got a lot of stories and life experience, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, I'm a songwriter. I'm a musician, and so for me, it's always been about the story for me. I've heard, a lot of my favorite songwriters are the ones from the 70s, like Jackson Browne and, John Denver and those guys that, they wrote stories and they told stories and they wrote all their own stuff. And so I'm a big story guy. Now, I remember you talking, on the Film Vault once about story not being the most important thing for you in a film.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing that's because of all the things you've done in a film, and what makes a film a film. There are bigger things that are important.
No, I've always felt that way. I guess after I've seen once I got old enough and I had seen a bunch of movies, I realized. Yeah, I think you realize that the same stories are told over and over and over again, and it's the characters and the dialogue that really stick with me, and certain scenes and sequences and situations.
Right. You described a film once as everything that a film shouldn't be. I don't remember which one it was. I don't remember which film it was, but you said this is just everything that a film shouldn't be.
Yeah, I see that sometimes.
So I wondered, so then for you, what makes a film everything a film should be?
It's an easy question if we're talking about documentaries, because I finally figured out the formula that works for me anyways when watching a documentary.
Okay.
And that's access and talking heads and animation and luck. That makes a perfect documentary. As far as like a narrative, I'm really big on characters and dialogue, like I said, and things that you can quote and scenarios. People usually, unless we're talking about animation, but human beings being put in these awkward, odd scenarios that you can insert yourself into and wonder how you would react if you were put in that situation. I'm bored. I think a lot of us are bored.
Yeah.
The hero wants something, the hero tries to get something. At the end of the second act, the hero is farthest away from his goal, and then the third act, redemption, and he gets what he wants or she gets what she wants. And that's the old formula that's been, played to death. And I'm not even saying that I'm upset when things are formulaic or predictable, as long as the characters that drive the story are memorable. And because I think of movies as like friends, and like these characters are like friends and they never change. And I can go back and visit those friends whenever I want. As hokey as that sounds, I can sit down and watch A Clockwork Orange and hang out for 2 hours with Alex DeLarge, and he's not going to change. He's not going to be different. I might perceive him differently, but he's going to stay the same.
Right. Yeah, and you're talking about dialogue that you remember, that sticks with you. So you all sign off every day with "Do It for Van Gogh,"
right?
And that's from Blue Velvet,
yeah.
Right? I've not seen that, but I've seen, I feel like because of how much you've talked about it and how much I've heard about it and things I've read about it, I feel like I've seen it. It's
a tough watch.
It is a tough watch because I did watch. I said, I'm going to go see, where that comes in, and I watched a couple of clips and when you're talking about putting yourself in positions of characters of what you would be doing and how you would be. If you put yourself in Kyle MacLachlan's place,
if you're in that closet,
you're in the closet watching things happen.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Exactly.
Yeah, you really kind of invest you in the moment. So I get that.
And I think when movies were first created, and stories just by large, going back century. I mean, we've been telling stories since we could communicate. The typical story is the hero's journey, and people like to put themselves in Rocky's shoes and imagine beating Apollo Creed, and they feel like $1 million when they leave the theater. And That worked for me a lot when I was younger. When I was a kid, I remember coming out of theaters with my dad and feeling like, high on life, and like, because I was living vicariously through the character. But after a while, that wears off, and you got to chase another dragon, I guess.
Yeah. So your short films, I love reading short fiction. Like I'll read Ray Bradbury or Neil Gaiman or things like that all the time, just because I love the format of short fiction. I love how they are able to just condense this big story in a short amount of time and have it work. And so it was fun looking at your films. I sat and watched all of them in a row. And
that's cool. I think very few people have ever done that.
Really,
so I like that.
No, it was.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're absolutely. It was cool to watch. I mean, first of all, just to see your own personal development and evolving as a filmmaker, but then seeing how you are crafting these films. Like, geez, like Cult of Carano was brilliant. I've heard you talk about it all the time, and I tell you what I loved about it. Well, first of all, just so that people might understand, it's a film about a guy named Mike Carano, played by Mike Carano, who there's a global disaster, and the power goes out, the water is undrinkable, and so he decides he wants to start a cult to take.
Right, he takes advantage of the circumstances. Yeah,
and he puts signs out in his yard saying "Help is here." He's already got supplies. He's got closets full of water.
He's been waiting for the right moment. Yeah,
he's been waiting, and it's funny because he has a water closet with a sign that says "Water Closet," and there's actually water in the closet, which is kind of a fun joke. But what really cracked me up was. Somebody knocks on the door. He goes out. There's like 20 people on his lawn. They're all spaced out perfectly, looking up at the door. And the first thing he says is like, "So all you guys are out here. How come it took you so long to knock on the door?" Just went straight for that trope, because we've seen it a million times in movies where people knock on the door. You open the door and there's like a dozen people outside just standing there looking at the door. So,
yeah, I tend to write fairly self-aware.
Yeah,
so.
It is really aware. And then even right after that, he's
then he sees somebody who he's nervous about and shows his gun and
the gun is like, "Ooh, it's a gun." So
that was my voice, actually. I was the one who voiced that.
That was,
yeah.
That was the other thing that cracked me up. It's just like, "Got this," and he shows the gun, and of course somebody has to announce what it is.
Right, so and I wanted to draw attention to that too, because I broke that rule. If you ever show a gun in the first act, that gun has to go off or come into play in the third act. And gun is never ever mentioned again. It's never talked about again.
That's right. That's right. So you broke the rule on purpose, though, because it's a rule worth breaking.
I love breaking rules. Yeah, right. I write self-aware. Like when you get a chance to finally see groupers and it's in public, like there's a few scenes where there's not a whole lot going on as far as story, and that's breaking a rule. You're never supposed to have a scene if the story is not being propelled forward. And I had there were a couple shortcomings in the script. It's not a perfect script by any means.
Yeah.
And I knew that if people weren't buying the new characters that were introduced in that scene, they weren't going to appreciate that scene at all. And it's funny because half the people that see the groupers, they love the two new characters that come in, and the other half hate those characters, and they're really bored with that scene because there's nothing there for them. Nothing new is happening in the story. The new characters are playing catch up.
Right.
And I knew that some people weren't going to like that, so I have one of the characters talking about how boring everything is and how sick they are of hearing about the story, because I knew that some people sitting in the audience are going to be feeling the same way, and I wanted them to feel like they weren't alone. So, yeah, I'm fairly self-aware when I write.
Yeah, well, I loved it. They were a lot of fun to watch, and then of course, Groupers is now out. That's your full-length film, and
it's not out. It's under lock and key.
It's not out. It was out for a while for some screenings.
I'm still doing the screen. I'm doing private screenings for people who helped put the movie together and gave me money to make it. So I'm touring around the country, and I got 3 of those left, and it will be available like on iTunes and Amazon and all that by sometime next year, hopefully in the first half of next year.
Cool.
But yeah, thanks for asking about that.
It was a change from obviously your short films, and that was something you've wanted to do for a long time. I remember you talking, almost a year ago about a show that you you were thinking about calling the pool or something like that, and it's like, oh, that's what he's talking about. This was a year ago, and so I mean, it's been a long time coming.
It's been a long time, Dan. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been writing scripts for 10, 15 years now, and they're just all expensive scripts. When I say expensive, like, $2-3 million. They're cheap Hollywood standard wise, but for me, how do you raise $2-3 million? And I was so happy when it was actually through a discussion that I had on one of my shows on the After Disaster. We came up with this absurd scenario of two homophobes being forced to be gay for each other with a Chinese finger trap between them, and I'm like, you know what? That's a cheap idea that I could probably build an entire movie around. And that was so I made this one in hopes of getting it out there and being able to make the other ones that I wrote before it, because that's what I really want to do.
Well, the cold open is enough to really suck you in and really want to see the whole thing. I watched the original capturing, so
yeah, I try to make it fairly intense, and I play it pretty straight. The first act, the first 30 minutes or so are pretty straight, because getting people to buy into such an absurd concocted idea, I wanted to play it as straight as possible, and then I get a little goofy as we go. But it's a lot more serious than the shorts. The shorts are all super goofy and cartoony.
So, go
before we move forward, you being a songwriter, I want to apologize this week on the Film Vault, the one that comes out this week. I'm talking shit about songwriters and how I don't want to hear from them. So my apologies about that. It was a reaction to Brian assigning me many music documentaries, and I appreciated the last two that he assigned me were actually documentaries about comedians. Gilbert Gottfried one, and then Robin Williams was the other. And I go on to say that I thank him for that, and I say I'd much rather hear what comedians have to say than musicians, because I don't want to hear what they have to say. So my apologies.
No, that's
to
okay.
you for that.
Well, for the record, I'm not a big fan of musical documentaries either, and so it's just I'd rather watch. I'd rather watch, National Geographic, honestly.
I'm just not a music guy. Like, when you're talking about your influences and stuff, like I couldn't tell you one song that they made. My mind is just a blank when it comes to music. I listened to Duran Duran growing up, and their lyrics mean nothing. They're all just poetry. So I never really listen to lyrics at all. I don't know. It's rare that I know what songs are about. So yeah.
Well, when I started listening to Film Vault, I wasn't really that bought into either one of you right away.
I'm not a good first date, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, both of you were, kind of cocky and smug, and I was like, oh, geez, these guys. But I listened for a while, and I don't know what happened. I just started enjoying what you were talking about, and I think what hooked me in was how comprehensive you guys were on talking about movies. It wasn't just, you can talk about a movie and thoroughly dislike everything about it, but you can say, but it had the best sound design I ever heard.
Yeah, I try and glean something good from every movie. I know how hard they are to make. I know how many people have to work on them and how long they take. So I hate it when critics come along and just shred it in a little like a 1-page review when it takes 3 years to make these things.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's hard to recommend your show to people, only because I know a lot of because I've have a history with listening to you all. I've kind of picked up on a lot of the the inside jokes, and I feel like I have to say, by the way, if you hear Brian saying something like really outrageously inappropriate and offensive, just relax. He's not serious. Or,
I don't like how he kind of eased into that role of being the guy that says it, because I was that guy for the first before we were even a podcast. When we were on terrestrial radio, I was the guy that was the shock jock type, and he's kind of taken that role. As far as our smugness and arrogance, that's just us competing with each other. Not really. I forget that anyone's even listening. I just think that I'm being forced to have a conversation about movies with Brian, which infuriates me and frustrates me, and that's where that's coming from.
Yeah. But it's been nice to see over the years, hearing your story with him over the years, like during his illness, during your dad's death, both, when you both announced when you were going to become fathers.
Yeah, that was weird. Like within a month.
It was like within a few weeks, it was crazy. It's become one of the most kind of real podcasts I've listened to.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks, Dan.
I mean,
there are other movie podcasts out there that are much more comprehensive and intelligent as far as talking about movies.
Sure.
But they're pretty dry. They're pretty dry. Yeah. I try and
exactly.
have fun with the conversation, as well as I got passion and I got love for these movies that I'm talking about a lot of the time.
Right.
So I hope that it's entertaining to a degree, and you also are picking something up, because I listen to some of the other dry film podcasts, and I learn stuff, but it's like sitting in class.
Right. So I just mentioned your dad a minute ago. I know that was a rough time. I was thinking, like, one of the most compelling moments I've ever listened to on a podcast was on the After Disaster. When you
listen to that one? Cool.
Oh yeah. Is when you made the announcement that your dad had died.
Yeah.
And I remember, because I think you guys were like set up in your backyard or something.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't remember what I was doing. I might have been working or, either taking a walk or something, or mowing the grass or something. But I just was like, it just stopped me in my tracks, because you had talked about him several weeks and months beforehand about just the struggle that you had. And I know that you had kind of a complicated relationship anyway with him,
to say the least.
Yeah. So it was such a weird time, but I mean, honestly, I was really feeling for you at that moment, because I mean, After Disaster is a totally different podcast. I mean, it's just you and Mike Carano and Tyler White just hanging out, talking, and it's pretty. I mean, you have things that you're probably gonna, it's probably somewhat topical, but things just happen that are pretty random oftentimes, and you guys are funny and you're making fun of each other. But that day, it seemed like you had two really good friends on either side of you.
Yeah, and I think he had just died the day before, so it had been like maybe 24 hours that I had known. And my initial plan was because they were on their way over to my house independently, Mike and Tyler, to record the show in my backyard. They didn't know, and I was going to tell them like on the show, and I figured that wouldn't be fair to them. That'd be kind of weird. So I texted both of them as they were driving over to my house to let them know that my dad had died, and then we just talked about it, and then Tyler had an announcement that he was going to make on that show, which was his wife was pregnant, but he held off, I guess, or maybe he did tell it that same. It's weird. And then Mike Carano's sister died about a year later, and that's when we found out that my wife was pregnant. So it's kind of weird, the whole life cycle, how it kind of lines up sometimes.
Right. Well, I just say that because it there's a lot of shows out there that are pretty, like you said, they're very dry, they're very they stay on script, they stay topical, and it's informational, and some of them are good, but just the things that you work on. I mean, I haven't listened to everything I did listen to Cinematics a little bit.
That's pretty dry.
It's a little bit dry, but it's very different, obviously, than Film Vault in a lot of ways. And you're with Greg. I can never pronounce his last name.
No one can. Surzavasti.
Okay, I'll just leave
Surzavasti.
Oh, sorry, Srizavasti. I'll just leave it at that.
He's a Filipino name, so it's tough.
Yeah. So his tastes are very different than yours. I mean, Brian's is very different than yours too.
Greg Surzavasti is the real deal too. I mean, he's an actual critic. He gets paid to be a critic, which is pretty great.
Right. And so I listened to what he has to say, and I listened to a lot of his critiques, and it's just interesting because it seems like you couldn't be much different from each other.
Yeah.
In that show, but it's cool to hear the shows that you do that are just conversational and real, and you're comfortable doing them. I mean, you've been doing them for what? Gosh, now
I think we started doing the Film Vault in some form or another, like 2008 or 2009.
Yeah.
And before that, we had done a few demos together. And then I was on Loveline and for years, chiming in when I wasn't supposed to talk, but I did. Mm-hmm. And then Pharrell on the Bench before that. So since 95, I've been working in some form of talk medium.
Yep. So one other thing I wanted to ask you about is camp, because you do a summer camp pretty much every year. Last year you were doing...
I haven't been able to do it since Atticus, my son, was born, so it's been a couple years.
It's been a couple years.
And it kills me. I did it every single year for like 22 or 23 years. I missed one summer in there, but Yeah, I did it. I did probably around 25 to 30 sessions, which is a week long up there. So I've been up there a lot.
So tell me what your role is up there. This is a camp for like critically ill kids?
It's an oncology camp, which is a fancy way of saying cancer camp.
Sure.
And it was created back in the 80s for terminally ill kids. Well, with the idea of terminally ill kids, because most kids that got cancer back, before the 90s would die. They didn't have, it was a death sentence. Medical has come leaps and bounds since then, and now we got like a 95% success rate, which is great. But kids are still getting cancer, so we still have the camp, and they're still affected by cancer, and their entire family is affected by cancer. So we serve not just the patients that have the cancer, but also their siblings. They can come to camp, and we also have family weekends where parents can come up with their young kids and have a bit of a community there. And I'm a counselor. I've been a director a few times, which isn't nearly as much fun. If you're a director, you're kind of like in charge of a bunch of cabins. But I mainly was a camp counselor for like the teenage boys. So I'd have like 10 to 12, 17, 18-year-old boys in my cabin, and we'd spend a week doing activities and group bonding, and we go on an overnight hike, and it's really, really a great place, and it's a great thing for people to do.
So is there some sort of support that you could give, donate to the camp or something like that? Is there still some sort of way that people could support it?
Yeah, camp's always looking for donations for sure. Like, I know they got like $1 million from the Kings, from the Los Angeles Kings a couple years ago, but that's ran out. Okay. My friend, last year, I guess it was, he was nominated to this. They do this clever marketing thing where they nominate a few people that have been around camp for a while to be a hero, and then they have them raise money, and whoever raises the most money is the hero, and they get a trophy, and there's a big banquet for them. And my friend Brian Border won a couple years ago, thanks a lot to my audience. I had my audience support him, and my audience was great. They came out and gave money to camp in Brian's name, and he won. Now this year, my buddy Mule, who's been up there he's been up there for, I think, before me, maybe. He's been up there for a long time. He's now nominated, and I forgot to actually talk about Mule on my last show. But, if you go over to Camp Ronald McDonald for Good Times, .com, they have all sorts of different things you can do to either volunteer or give money, and they have work weekends where if you know construction that you can go up there and help out with the facility. It's great. It's a great place. It's up in the mountains and overlooks Palm Springs way up there. If anyone is hearing this and they would like, because I'm very upset with myself for forgetting to talk about this on the Film Vault, which I recorded last night. But if anyone is hearing this and they're looking for a tax write-off and you want to give to a great cause, I can say firsthand that it is a great place. The stuff that we do for these kids. I used to tell them, I don't like kids, but I like these kids because these kids have seen so much, and there's something about facing death and going through all these hardships that really make them appreciate life. And they're great kids, and they all come together and help out the kid in the wheelchair, the kid that's missing his leg, or the kid that's mentally challenged, because we have a lot of Down syndrome kids up there because they're more they're more prone to cancer. Unfortunately, they get the double whammy there. So watching these kids were I remember growing up. You grew up at the same time I did, where kids would get bullied all the time, and there's very little of that at this camp. It's really great. So my buddy Jamie Moss is his name. He's one of the heroes, and I'm sure that they have something about him on the website. His nickname is Mule because he's a very large man. He's short and stout. He's about as wide as he is tall. He's great. I love Jamie. I love Mule. And he drives a little red Miata. It's very funny. He's a character.
Nice. Okay, so now Groupers is over. What's not over, but you've finished creating Groupers. So after it's out and after it's available, what do you want to do now?
Make another movie.
Yeah, you got an idea?
Oh yeah, I mean, I got the scripts. I'm ready to go. I've done. I'm sure that I'll do another pass or two if I am fortunate enough to actually produce these things. But I mean, it's all been leading to these other scripts that I have written, and I also have like a number of treatments for other stories. So I got around 7 original screenplays that I want to make. I have a full career lined up as far as movies that I want to make. And if Groupers is fortunate enough to get into one of these major festivals that I'm submitting to, it might get a backer and it might get distribution. And if I can make the money back on that the budget was, then I'm in line to talk to investors and studios, and I might be able to actually make another movie. That's the game that I'm playing right now. So I got to make $80,000 on this one, and if I can, then I'm somebody to talk to. If I don't, no one cares how good the movie is. No one in the business cares about the merits, or if it was acted well, or if I made it look good for such a cheap amount. That doesn't matter. It's all about the money. It's all about the business end of things now. So that's the game I'm playing.
I got you.
Well, if anyone's listening and they've been thinking about wanting to make a movie, it's really odd to try and imagine what I'd be doing if I was younger in today's technological world. If I wanted, because I waited and put off making a movie for the longest time because technology wasn't there, and I was right at the forefront of when video started coming in, and I hated it. I hated the look of video. I hated the feel of video, and people were making movies on video and putting them in theaters, and I just hated it. And film was just so out of reach because it was so expensive. So I didn't do it for a very long time, and I like to think that if I was younger, I would have made my first movie at a much younger age. And if you want to do it, borrow a camera, rent a camera, and throw it in some festivals and cut your teeth, because it's really hard to get practice as a filmmaker. It's really hard. It's really expensive, but it's not nearly as expensive as it used to be. And I think Tarantino said it like in a roundtable. He was talking it was Tarantino a few years ago. And I'm not one to quote Tarantino. I'm not a giant fan of the man, but he is a super smart guy. And he was talking about practice as a director. And it's not like you can go out and play catch with your friend and get better at baseball. It's not that. You got to actually do it. So, do it on your phone. Just do it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The technology is such that anybody can. Well, I mean, you've talked about it before. How people have released full-length feature films shot on an iPhone. Right. I mean, was your early ones on film? Did you use film?
Yeah, I didn't do any. One of my problems, Dan, was my standard, and a lot of my favorite filmmakers, I realize now, they grew up like on Roger Corman films or John Carpenter films. They loved like the schlocky horror stuff. Like Peter Jackson's a great example of that. Like he loved the schlocky horror stuff, which is achievable. Like, if you're watching that and you're obsessed with that when you're a kid, you're like, I could make something like that with my little video camera that could, have the same effect, or I could do blood and gore, and that's what they got into. So they started doing it at really young ages with Super 8 cameras or those beta cams that we had back in the 80s. I was like Mr. Quality Film. I was watching Kubrick at a young age and obsessed with De Niro's career, and I didn't want to embarrass myself and make something that didn't look like one of those movies, which really stunted my my actual action in doing anything, unfortunately. So,
yeah. Well, I think you've caught up just fine.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks so much for doing this, man. It was really great. I really appreciate it.
This is a lot of fun. I'm hungry for adult conversation because I'm a stay-at-home dad, and I hang out with my 2-year-old. He's not even 2 yet, so the conversation is pretty circular.
Yeah,
don't get a whole lot to talk about.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it worked out.
Talk with our mouths closed. We chase the American dream. He steps out the front door and strides down the staircase, straightens his bow tie, masking his loneliest face. Glides down the street, man, stop using your feet. There's places to go.
So that's a lot to say in a short amount of time, right? I really wish we'd had a little bit more time, but we had to keep the conversation short, schedule-wise. I hope you enjoyed listening, and be sure and head over to the episodes page at danhite.com for more information on Anderson, including a brief clip that he let me make from The Cult of Carano. Specifically the scene we talked about early in the film when all his neighbors show up all at once. I asked him if his short films will be made available soon, and he suggested that at some point after Groupers was available, they'd be available in some format as well. So, there you go. all of the content we talked about isn't quite yet available for your viewing pleasure. Sorry. You can, however, head over to andersoncowan.com, that's his website, and keep up to date with all the news surrounding groupers and any and all projects that he's involved in. By the way, the music you're listening to right now, as well as the short bit right before my conversation with Anderson, is from local musician Lucas Harris. I'm starting a new thing where I'll be featuring local artists to give you an idea of what I'm talking about when I say that Central Ohio is crawling with really incredible talent. Find more of Luke at his Bandcamp profile. I'll provide a link on the episode's page. All right, that's it for me, you guys. Thanks so much for listening, and even though it's not all that important to Anderson, let's go make some stories.